Hello.
Go for it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Giselle Pineda. I am the Vice President of Social Media here at PreMedCC, and it is with great honor and pleasure that I introduce our speaker for today. Our speaker is Dr. Christopher Little. He is currently a PGY-3 at UCLA Medical Center's Anesthesiology residency program. He was born and raised in Sacramento, California. Dr. Little graduated from Rio Americano High School, and after high school, he went to community college at American River College. He spent 4 years at American River College before transferring to UC Davis, where he majored in neurobiology, physiology, and behavior. He then attended UC Davis School of Medicine, where he received his medical doctorate. Following residency, he will be pursuing fellowships in liver anesthesiology as well as critical care anesthesiology. So without further ado, thank you, Dr. Little, for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that nice introduction. All right, so I am going to try not to show how much of a technological Luddite I am, and I'm going to try to share my screen without anything going awry. So I made a short presentation so that I can sort of stay on topic for most stuff. But I kept it relatively brief in case people have questions. I prefer to spend more time answering questions, but if there aren't questions and people are still interested in hearing me talk, obviously I can go on forever. I love the sound of my own voice, and I will just keep talking until the allotted amount of time to me is given up. Let's go ahead and get started with sort of my prepared stuff. Okay, so what I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about is how my community college experience went, and then basically the path I took from there to my current position as an anesthesiology resident at UCLA. So, like they said in the introduction, I'm a PGY-3 anesthesiology resident at UCLA. What PGY-3 means, for those of you who aren't familiar, is it's postgraduate year 3. So I graduated medical school 3 years ago and have been in residency for that amount of time. Anesthesiology residency is 4 years. Most residencies are somewhere between 3 and 5 years. Anesthesiology kind of splits right down the middle. So after 4 years, you can finish your anesthesiology residency program, and then you can go on and practice as an attending anesthesiologist, or you can do a 1-year fellowship post anesthesiology residency in some sort of subspecialty. Some people do 2 fellowships. It's not super common, but typically people who do critical care will also do another fellowship. So the fellowship that I'll be doing year after next is liver transplant anesthesiology at Emory, sort of like you heard Geffen and I talking about earlier. The ultimate trajectory for my career is to get an academic position doing anesthesiology, where I will teach residents and teach medical students. So that's what I hope to do with my career. And I would say, of the people who graduate from UCLA, it's probably about half and half. 50% of people go to community, or 50% of people go to community practice, and 50% go to academics. But most people who go through anesthesiology will wind up in some type of private practice facility. So what I want to tell you guys about now is sort of how my path went early on, and sort of where I went to school at different parts of my life. So like they said earlier, I went to Rio Americano High School. I did not do very well in high school. I graduated like 350 out of about 400 students in my high school. I think my GPA was like 2.1 or 2.2, not the best GPA. And I chalked most of that up to a couple of things. One is I was not a particularly motivated person. I didn't really know what I wanted to do at the time. And it felt kind of silly putting a bunch of effort into high school when I didn't know if I wanted to go to college. And if I did go to college, I didn't know what I was going to want to do. So I went to American River College, did a little bit of soul searching while I was there. I spent 2 years at American River College pursuing first civil engineering and then psychology, thinking I was going to be a therapist. Therapy is what initially led me to my career in medicine. I became interested in therapy, but therapists and clinical therapists have a lot of limitations in their career. and that they're not able to prescribe medications. They're not able to do certain things that you would be able to do if you're a physician. If you become a physician and become a psychiatrist, you can practice much more independently. And so that was my initial rationale going into medical school. So after about 2 years of community college, I sort of changed gears and decided I was going to go to medical school. During the first 2 years of community college, I was selecting very easy courses. And so my GPA was still pretty good in community college. It was better than it was in high school because I was sort of able to tailor my schedule in a way that would make it easy for me to continue to basically still be lazy and do well at community college. That being said, when I switched gears to start pursuing medical school, the coursework that I had to take for pre-med courses was much more challenging than what I had anticipated. So as I'm sure some of you know, most of you who are looking at going into medicine, I'm sure some of you have started looking into what the pre-med requirements are. When I went to medical school, I started medical school in 2019. No, that's when I graduated. 2015 is when I started, already losing track of the time. When I started med school in 2015, the requirements were like a year and a half of biology, 2 years of chemistry, both Gen Chem and OChem, a year of math, mostly calculus. And those courses were much more challenging than I anticipated them being. So some of the things that really helped me along during those times were finding some good mentors, finding some good people to study with, and changing a lot of my study habits. So after kind of getting my butt in gear, learning how to study a little bit better, finding some mentors who could give me some good advice on what I needed to do, how well I needed to do to succeed, I managed to do well enough at American River College to secure an undergraduate position at UC Davis. I went to UC Davis for 2 years. I majored in neurobiology, physiology, and behavior, which at the time was sort of the quintessential pre-med major. And then I minored in professional writing. The minor in professional writing has helped me a lot. I encourage a lot of people who go to undergrad before med school, obviously you all have to, but I encourage you to do one of two things. You're only going to get to go to undergraduate once. And everything that I learned in my neurobiology, physiology, and behavior major, I relearned in medical school during the first 2 years of medical school. I will say, having taken neurobiology, physiology, and behavior courses, I think that the first 2 years of medical school were easier for me because it was a little bit more review than what some of my classmates were coming in. That being said, you will not get a chance to pick a major ever again. And you may miss out on not getting to major in something that you like more than, say, your typical physiology coursework, because you won't be able to choose your coursework in medical school. So basically what I'm saying is, if you do pick a biology heavy major, you'll well wind up learning most of that stuff. You'll have some advantages because you'll go into medical school with a bigger knowledge background than most people, but you'll have missed out on an opportunity to learn some stuff that you won't get to before. If you sort of elect to do it the way I did it, which is to do a physiology major or a cell biology or biochemistry major, I encourage you to minor in something that's interesting to you academically or outside of the interest of medicine, just so you can feel like you're more well-rounded. You get to experience a little bit more college than sort of the narrow walk that you go through when you go through undergrad straight to medical school. So after I finished UC Davis undergrad, I went to UC Davis School of Medicine. So I didn't really want to stray too far from my family, and UC Davis's med school is in Sacramento, which is where I grew up. So it was a pretty reasonable choice to go to UC Davis after undergraduate. I picked UC Davis mostly for geography, and I think most people will tell you that geography, no matter what other people say, is probably going to be the most important thing when you pick your medical school, when you pick your residency. Don't say that, of course, on your interviews, but geography is really important, so don't feel guilty about wanting to stay close to your family if that's where you want to go. That being said, not everybody cares just about geography. So if you really want to go to another school, it's important to let them know. Anyway, UC Davis School of Medicine is a great school, a great med school. I encourage you guys to go there if you get an opportunity. it has advantages and disadvantages. UC Davis is geared more towards sort of the primary care track people, that type of thing. But I think you can go to UC Davis and graduate any type of subspecialty. Like 3 or 4 people my year became anesthesiologists. So certainly up to whatever you want to do. And then now I'm at UCLA's anesthesiology program, 1 more year there. And then I will be a board certified anesthesiologist. I could practice anesthesiology if I want, but I'm going to do another year of fellowship on top of that. So that's sort of the trajectory of my educational path. So I started out in high school, Rio Americano, didn't do super well, American River College, UC Davis undergrad, UC Davis med school, and then anesthesiology at UCLA. So I wanted to talk a little bit about extracurriculars. I had some sort of unique opportunities. One of the big things that I think really put me over the edge in terms of other applicants and sort of helping me get my feet wet with medicine was the surgical internship program. That's actually where I met Geffen. Geffen was one of my mentors during the surgical internship program, and he basically built that program, which allowed students to come in, shadow, see people in the operating room, get a chance to see what inpatient medicine is really like. And a lot of people coming from undergrad don't really get to see that side of medicine. So it was really an excellent program, and I'm happy I got to do it. And I met a lot of the mentors that helped me where I wanted to go during that time. So if you can get into a program that's going to expose you to more physicians, it helps you in a couple of ways. It helps you stay inspired and motivated to keep working. And then it helps you with letters of recommendation, that type of thing when you're applying to medical school. And it also helps you just to see if medicine is really what you want to do. I originally decided I was going to pursue med school in order to go into psychiatry, and anesthesiology is not that close to psychiatry. Psychiatry is very cerebral subspecialty. Anesthesiology is a very procedural, pharmacology heavy subspecialty. Not at all what I was expecting to do when I went into medical school. But of course I wouldn't choose anything else over anesthesiology. But a big part of that is seeing more inpatient medicine and becoming more familiar with those things, because I really had no idea what it was like before then. And then you should spend some time with your extracurricular activities doing things that you care about. So I spent a lot of time volunteering for different homeless groups. During med school, I worked at a student-run clinic at UC Davis that was oriented towards taking care of homeless folks at the Salvation Army there in Sacramento. And the reason I was able to do so much of that work with my extracurricular time was because it was something I cared about. So, it's easy to sort of pick some things to do in order to check off that box when you're applying to medical school for, like, I spent some time volunteering. I worked in the hospital and I did some like patient bed cleaning or whatever. You have to have those things. It's important for med schools to see that you've done that type of volunteer work and something like that. But it's a lot more gratifying for you, and you'll be much happier to talk about your experiences doing those things if you really enjoyed the things that you're doing. So I'm not saying everybody who goes to med school has to spend their time volunteering for homeless groups. That's what I cared about, and that's what I enjoyed spending my time doing. But there are thousands and thousands and thousands of worthy causes out there, and I think you guys should take some time to look at them, see which ones you think are the most interesting and what you would enjoy spending your time doing. Not everybody who goes to med school does research prior to med school, but it certainly does help. I was a pretty research heavy applicant. I actually started my research in the UC Davis School of Medicine plastic surgery department while I was still in community college. So through the surgical internship program that Geffen and I met at, I was sort of hooked up with some of the surgical faculty who were looking for undergrads to help them with their research. So I worked for Dr. Sahar, one of the plastic surgery attendings at UC Davis, and we actually had a pretty productive relationship. I worked with him all during undergrad and all during med school. So he was a very good research mentor for me. He wrote my letter of recommendation for medical school. And he also wrote one of my letters of recommendation for residency, which sounds a little bit silly because he's a plastic surgeon and I was applying to anesthesiology. But because I'd had that relationship for like 6 years, he was able to write a very good letter of recommendation for me because we'd known each other and worked together for such a long period of time. So if you're able to do research during undergrad, it can be fairly time consuming, but you wind up getting very close to research mentors. I've found a lot of people that I meet and talk to in med school and residency have worked very closely with research mentors over the years, and they've obviously given them good advice on how to do research and given them good letters of recommendation, but they've also given them excellent advice on how to apply to medical school, what type of things that you need to be doing in order to succeed as a medical student, succeed as a resident. And those are people who have all gone through what you're going through. So it's helpful to do research, but you also get quite a bit of value in the research mentors that you meet while you're doing it. That being said, it is pretty tough to get a research spot as an undergraduate, particularly at community college. Most people who go to community college, I think, will not do research during their community college time. But when you transfer to a 4-year university, I encourage you to look for research mentors early. The easiest way to do that is to probably look at faculty who are teaching the courses that you're taking and going to their office hours and seeing if they're interested in taking anybody on for research. Because sort of cold emailing people to ask to be on research projects as an undergraduate doesn't work super well. But there's opportunities out there. You just have to do a little bit more digging as an undergraduate than you will as a medical student. And then even less, the further along you go in your career, the easier it is to get research spots. So I've gotten sort of to a point in my career in residency where I am trying to learn to do the opposite thing. Now I'm trying to learn to say no to research projects a little bit more frequently. I'm still working on it, but you'll get that sort of feeling as you go through. Okay, so some things that I wish I knew before I went to medical school. During community college, I really wish I knew how to study. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. I'm sure there's a lot of questions that people have not related to studying, based on how to go to medical school, how to get into medical school, that type of stuff. But I really think learning good study skills will save you so much, especially now. Assuming everybody here is still in community college, you have a lot of studying ahead of you. So if you invest some time now to learn good study skills, it will pay off quite a bit later on. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. I sort of touched on this earlier as well. Finding good mentors is really important. A lot of the people that I knew in undergrad helped propel me to where I am now. I think had I not met a couple of people, I think Jubin obviously exposed me to a ton of the resources that I had. One of my undergrad community college chemistry professors, Brian Weisbart, and then Dr. Sahar, who I talked about earlier. If it weren't for those three folks, I probably wouldn't have gotten into medical school, because I just didn't have the motivation and drive to do what you need to do to get into medical school, and I didn't really understand the expectations. So having people in your life who can sort of give you a little bit of guidance is very helpful. Another big thing is finding friends who have similar goals to you. I became very good friends with a guy named Jason Compton that we were sort of talking about earlier. He also went to community college. He went to Delta, though, in Stockton, so not the same community college, but we met through the surgical internship program. And we became very good friends when we both went to undergrad at Davis. And it was very helpful to have him around because he was a very motivated person and he was obviously bound for medical school. And working with him a lot, we took a lot of courses together. We studied together. I learned a lot of good study skills from him. And a lot of times you'll find, it's just not going to be that exciting to go study. But if you're going to go do it with a friend, then it's going to be a lot more enjoyable. But it's also a lot more helpful if that friend has similar goals to you and you're going to focus and do what you guys need to do when you're there. And then the last thing I'll say is motivation is one of those things that can be a little bit fickle. So, some days as a resident, I wake up and I am just pumped to go do my job and learn to be a better anesthesiologist. And some days I wake up and I am not excited to go to work. And I feel like I'm just doing a job and, it can be kind of tough. So that motivation comes and goes. So it can't always be relied on for what you need it to be. But some things I will say are that early successes build motivation. So, early on in community college, when I was sort of just chugging along, the first couple of years before I decided I was going to go into medicine, I didn't have a lot of excitement in my community college experience. I wasn't trying that hard. And so I didn't feel excited after I did well on a test or if I did well in a course because I wasn't doing super, super well. But as I started building more and more success, I would get happier and happier with those successes. So being successful early on will help you out. And I think in order to do that, it's important to learn how to study a little bit better. So let me see, I'm going to click to the next one. Oh, I missed a slide, but I was going to do a little introduction into stuff. What I want to talk about now I'm not going to teach you guys how to study during this talk. That's obviously not possible. There's a lot of stuff that you have to do in order to do that. But I will say study skills are very important for making it easier for you to get the work you need to get done. So I'm just going to cover a couple of quick things, give you guys a couple of resources I think you should look into, and then it'll be up to you guys whether you want to take any of that with you. But I just want to cover a couple of quick things, and then I'll give you guys lots of time for questions. So the biggest thing that's based in evidence are spaced repetition and active recall. So I think early on during community college, I spent a lot of my time basically reading a chapter or reading the notes that I took in my course. And I would read it and read it and read it and read it over again. And you sort of build up a familiarity with a text over time. And that familiarity makes you feel like you have a mastery over a concept. But you're not really you don't really have mastery over a concept as much as you have mastery over your notes on that concept. And while that may seem like a silly distinction, it's not actually a very effective way to study. And you spend a lot of time doing it that way. And then you wind up not actually learning that much from it. So I implore you guys to look into spaced repetition. I implore you guys to look into active recall. During medical school, I actually discovered an app called Anki. I'm sure a lot of folks know about Anki already, but Anki is a program where you build your own flashcards, or sometimes there are flashcards that'll work for you, but I encourage you to build your own. It's on iPhone, it's on computers, both Mac and PC. I use it on my iPhone and my PC. There are lots of good YouTube videos on there about how to make good Anki cards and how to use Anki. The reason I say Anki is the best is because it has both spaced repetition and active recall built into it. When you think of active recall, think of like flashcards, right? So basically you're forcing yourself to remember a topic. And then Anki will, each time you remember that topic, space it out further and further and further. So you get a little bit longer and longer periods in between those repetitions. Some other good ones are Quizlet. I didn't really use it very much, but I had friends who use Quizlet. You can set up Quizlet to have a spaced repetition algorithm, but I don't really know how to do it and didn't really adapt to it. And then RemNote is sort of the other big one. It's very useful. I think it has more things that you can use than Anki, but it's kind of complicated, and Anki is a little bit simpler to use. My other tips for studying is study a little bit at a time. So early on during community college, I would spend a ton of my time studying right before the last couple of days, right before the test. And you can actually do okay on a test by cramming, especially during community college and during undergraduate. You could probably cram your way to succeeding on just about every test. But in medical school, I'm sure people have told you the metaphor of like drinking from a fire hose. The amount of material that you have to cover in medical school compared to the amount of material that you have to cover in undergraduate it's like night and day, right? So you have to find a way where you can study every day, a little bit at a time, so you're not trying to do it all at the last minute. And in medicine, more than in other fields, you have to remember that work later on, right? So in community college and in undergrad, generally, you'll have to remember stuff for a final at the end. So you don't want to mass practice and like cram right before your test, the first couple tests, because then you'll have to relearn all that stuff before your final. So it's not a very effective way to do it. But in medicine, you just can't really cram anymore. It gets to be a little bit too much. And then the last couple of things I'll say, and hopefully we can make some of these available so people can learn. But I encourage you to just pick up a couple of books about learning how to study, because there's a lot of things people are going to tell you about medical school, how to get into medical school. You need to do extracurricular activities. You need to have some experience in medicine. You need to have good motivation to go to medical school. But none of those things are going to matter if you can't do well enough on entrance exams and have a good enough GPA. None of those things are going to matter if you can't transfer from community college to a four-year university. So spend some time, read a couple of books, learn how to study. My favorite is Make It Stick. I think it's great. Mostly it focuses on theory though. And it teaches you how to like sort of big, broad picture topics about studying. And then some of the other books like Accelerated Learning Techniques and How to Become a Straight A Student by Cal Newport give you more practical tips. But I encourage you guys to look at Make It Stick, even if you do read the other ones first. And then Ali Abdal is a pretty good YouTuber. I've looked at a lot of his stuff, especially during medical school. He has a lot of content on how to learn and how to be more efficient, that type of stuff. He also has a Skillshare course that I think you actually have to pay for. And I didn't take it, but it covers a lot more material than he covers on his YouTube. So investing a little bit of time early on with some of these resources will pay off quite a bit later on. And I think that's, oh yeah, I do have one more thing. When you're going to from community college to undergraduate and from undergraduate to medical school, one thing I was really, really concerned about was that people were going to think that I was stupid, or people were going to assume that I didn't belong somewhere because I went to community college. And that was not the case for the vast majority of places. There was one medical school that I applied to that was a little bit snippy that I went to community college, but I didn't go there for med school anyway, so it doesn't matter. The vast majority of people who you're going to meet in undergraduate, the vast majority of people who you're going to meet in medicine are not going to care that you went to community college first, as opposed to going to a four-year university right off. In fact, I think there are 3 or 4 of my co-residents at UCLA right now who were community college graduates who then went to undergrad and then went to medical school. Medicine, especially the further up you get, is mostly merit-based. So if you can perform well in medical school, if you can perform well in undergraduate, and even if you perform well at your community college, you will get good opportunities to move on, even though you may feel, in a way that I do, you may feel a little bit self-conscious about that type of thing. In the long run, it won't affect you too much. So long as you can make those next steps, no one is going to care where you came from. Okay, so that's all the prepared remarks that I have. What I do want to do is leave my emails with you. I check them both pretty regularly, but if you're going to write one down to save one, I would probably save the Gmail one, because in a year and change, I'm going to be switching from UCLA to Emory probably. So the email address that UCLA email address will not be functional anymore, but the Gmail email address I will have forever. So that's all of the big stuff I wanted to talk about. I'm happy to take some questions now if you guys have them. Let me.
Giselle's going to ask you the questions, and then you could answer them to the best of your ability.
So we have a few questions. The first question is, can you talk about the process of matching into anesthesiologists and how challenging that was?
Yeah, sure can. So matching into anesthesiology from medical school is pretty much down the middle. So anesthesiology is about the same level of competitiveness as internal medicine, which is sort of the biggest group of applicants. It's always been an average level competitiveness. So if you are good enough to get into medical school and graduate through medical school, you will probably be good enough to go to an anesthesiology residency program. That being said, anesthesiology in the last couple of years in particular has gotten a little bit more competitive. And that's probably because, anesthesiologists get compensated very well for their job. And they don't work quite as many hours as some of the procedural fields like surgery and like interventional radiology. But basically you match into anesthesiology through the NRMP. Basically you interview at all of the anesthesiology programs that you want to interview at, and then they make a rank order and you make a rank order, and they submit all that to an algorithm, and that algorithm tries to match the best spot that your best program with the program that wants you the most. And so for me, that wound up being UCLA. And that is sort of an interesting story because not only did I go through the match for anesthesiology, but I went through the couples match. So my fiance is an internal medicine resident at Cedars-Sinai. So we actually had to make a very complicated algorithm to get a couples matching system to work out, but it did work out really well. And we're both in Los Angeles now, where we wanted to be. But yeah, the nice thing about matching into anesthesiology is it's not a hyper competitive field, and most anesthesiologists that you meet are pretty happy people. So if you can get into medical school, you can probably get into an anesthesiology residency too.
Thank you. Next question is, did you do your extracurricular activities in community college or when you transferred into university?
Yeah, so I did both. So I started doing research during community college, and I continued working with those same people while I was at Davis. It's sort of a unique scenario, right? Because I went to community college at the place, like in close proximity. American River College is in Sacramento. I went to community college in close proximity to my undergraduate institution, which was UC Davis. And then I went to UC Davis for medical school, which is still close to where I grew up. So I was able to continue working with those same mentors. I definitely started doing research as an undergraduate, though. I started doing work with the homeless and that type of thing during community college. And I would encourage you guys to start doing that too. I will say most of the transfer agreements that you get from a community college to an undergraduate institution are primarily academically based. But having extracurriculars will probably help you when you're applying to an undergraduate as well. And then the surgical internship program, I did that while I was in community college too.
Dr. Little,
yes.
Can you tell them how long you were at community college?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I was at community college for 4 years. So
you were at community college longer than you were at your at UC Davis undergrad.
Correct. Yeah. I was at community college for 4 years, and I was only at UC Davis undergrad for 2 years. So by the time I got to Davis, it was pretty much all business because I'd been in community college for 4 years. So I didn't take any extra time after I transferred to Davis from American River College, but I certainly took my time at community college. But you know what? I think I sometimes feel a little bit silly about having gone to community college for 4 years. But if I had not gone to community college and done those first 2 years first, I wouldn't be a physician, because I switched gears after I'd done my first 2 years in community college. And those first 2 years really helped me decide what I wanted to do. And I'm glad that I had them, because otherwise I would probably be like a civil engineer or a therapist if I took some spot where I was on a little bit more of a defined trajectory. So if you wind up going to community college for longer than the traditional 2 years, which I don't think anybody actually goes to community college for only 2 years unless you start community college very motivated. I think most people are probably like on a three-year track. I don't know if that's true anymore. You guys can probably tell me better.
3.2 years.
3.2, is that the average?
Yes.
Yeah, same, makes sense. So if you are going to go to community college for more than 2 years, I would not fret about it. I think it's perfectly reasonable. And a lot of people who I know who went to community college also went for 4 years. I think Jason Compton went for 5. So, not super surprising.
Okay, next question. Can you tell us about the evolution of your studying from UC Davis to medical school and how much you changed your technique and approach to do well in medical school?
Yeah, totally. So the first couple of years of community college, I did not really study any differently than I did in high school. Basically, what I would do during early community college was I would take notes during class, and then I would review those notes before the test. And I basically didn't do anything between taking the notes and reviewing a couple of days before the test. And I got lucky that worked out for most courses. For some courses, it did not work out. And I didn't have, straight A's in community college because those first couple of years, I didn't really know what I was doing. And I sort of did just enough to get by. As I became a little bit more motivated, I didn't really develop good study skills while I was still at community college, but I did develop a little bit more rigor in my studying habits during the second 2 years of community college, because the coursework that you need for pre-med, those courses are more rigorous than what I was used to taking. I'm taking your general chemistry and your organic chemistry courses. So I still did a lot of note taking and reviewing those notes before tests, but I definitely did a little bit more peer-to-peer work, especially in the chemistry courses and the physics courses. I spent a lot more time studying in groups instead of just studying by myself and working out those problems in people with groups. And being able to talk things out with other people was a lot more helpful, assuming you have, a group of folks who are motivated to study with you. And so once you start getting into that coursework, the typical write some notes down during class, read it again before the test won't really work anymore because the amount of thinking you have to do for those courses is quite a bit higher. So that's sort of what I started doing during community college. And then as I moved into undergraduate and medical school, I started doing some spaced repetition stuff. I didn't do as much active recall until I got to medical school. So I didn't start using the Anki program until I was in medical school. But the biggest shift that I made from community college to undergraduate was studying over longer periods of time. So I studied almost every day in undergraduate. I didn't study 10 hours a day or anything like that. But I would almost always study at least, an hour or 2 hours. And I would review material from earlier on during the course as I was going through. So when I came to a test, I wasn't starting from scratch. And spacing that out, doing a little bit of studying every single day really, really takes a lot of the stress out of your life. I mean, sometimes you're not going to be in the mood to study, and you don't have to study every single day. You're gonna have days where you're just not excited to do it. But studying at a fairly consistent pace is going to help you a lot when you get to those tests, because the bulk of the work is already behind you when your test comes up. And then the biggest difference between that and medical school was incorporating a type of active recall. So Anki programs, flashcards, that type of thing, force you to learn to answer questions instead of just reading the answer. And it's important to do that because a lot of times we have these sort of illusions of knowing where we assume that we know the answer because we're very familiar with our own notes. We're very familiar with sort of a textbook that we're reading. And so you sort of skim past that stuff. But you're not actually having to activate the pathways in your brain that are required to produce that information. And that's what you're going to have to do on a test. So, I think there's an old phrase, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's like, play how you practice and practice how you play, or it's practice how you play because you're going to play how you practice. So if you are studying in a way that emulates how you're going to be tested, it's a lot easier to perform well on your test because you've been doing it this whole time. So using a flashcard program makes it a lot easier for you to retain that information, and you're studying in a way that is similar to how you're going to be tested later on. And that's how I study now too. For anesthesiology boards and stuff during residency, I obviously don't study as much now as I did during medical school, because residency studying is just not as hard as it is during medical school, but I still use the same techniques to study now as I did then.
Thank you. Okay, next question. At what time in your undergraduate career did you study for the MCAT and applied to medical school?
Yeah, it's a great question. I studied for the MCAT during the summer between my junior and senior year of undergraduate. So if you sort of understand the timeline, that means if you take it at that time that you have to take a year off between undergraduate and medical school, which I did. So I took a year off after I graduated to do research and then go to medical school. But I studied during the summer. I took a fairly lengthy amount of time to study. If you sort of, are catching themes, I don't perform well cramming for tests, and the MCAT is just simply too big of a monster to really cram for. So I took about 4 months to study for the MCAT, and I'm going to talk about numbers and scores here. I know that the numbers and scores are different now, but you can sort of glean, I guess, a trajectory from it. The first 2 months I spent literally reading all of the Princeton Review textbooks on the material that you need all the material you need to know to do well on the MCAT. And then I took notes on those things. I made flashcards out of those things. And then I studied all those flashcards. And that was the bulk of my work during the first 2 months. During the second 2 months, I spent most of that time reviewing flashcards, doing a type of active recall, and then taking practice tests. So I ultimately got a 39 on the MCAT, which is, I'm sure, different than the numbers that you guys have now. But the first time I took a practice test, I got a 25, which was not very good. And that was after I'd finished all the studying for all the Princeton Review books. So I'd covered all the material that I was going to cover at that time. And I got a 25, and I was not super thrilled about it. But what I did with that test and with all the subsequent practice tests that I did was I went back and looked at all of the answers that I missed and tried to retain that information, figure out why I answered those questions wrong, and try to figure out a way I would not answer them wrong in the future. And so that helps you, one, to study for the test, but it also sort of helps you review for material, especially if you're doing a lot of practice tests. So I made a huge leap between the first practice test that I took and the last practice test that I took. And that was simply learning how to take the MCAT, getting a lot of exposure to questions, and sort of getting a sense of what they're looking for and that type of stuff. So I'm not saying you don't have to learn the material. You definitely do. You can't succeed at the MCAT without learning all that material. But a big part of the MCAT and all other tests that you're going to take in your life too is learning what kinds of things the tests are looking for, learning to pace yourself, making sure you have enough time to finish all your questions. And the only way you can get a sense for those things is to take as many practice tests and do as many practice questions as you can do. Oh, that's another thing. Sorry, I'm super long-winded and I apologize. I did not spend enough time talking about practice questions. I don't think most courses in undergraduate have practice questions. But practice questions, I earnestly believe, are the most effective way to learn information. Even if you're not familiar with information before you take a question, if you answer a question or attempt to answer a question and then learn the material after that, studies have shown that you actually learn the material much better. So in courses where you have questions available, or if you have a textbook that has questions, do them. It's really important to do them. When I was an undergraduate, man, I would just skip right over the sections in textbooks that had question reviews, or I would get to the end of a chapter that had sort of there's always, like in most textbooks, there's always a little section at the end that's got 20 questions or something that says like, oh, what did you learn from this thing? I ignored it every single time. I implore you not to ignore it. They're very, very valuable. And it's a really great sense of learning. Once you get to medical school and once you get to residency, every subspecialty and every group in medicine has a giant set of practice questions for you to do. I encourage you to do them because I think it's the easiest way to learn medicine. And I think it's the easiest way to retain information generally.
Thank you. That was very helpful. The next one is.
Can I just interject? Can you tell them one thing you did also in community college that really helped you be focused and study and be involved in the community?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of like one thing I did that helped me study was, I think I spent time early on trying to study at home. It's not super useful. So your study environment is really helpful. And while I was at community college, that was the first time I really started hanging out in the library. And I think a lot of people don't really enjoy working in library. But that's one way to do it. And then I think Jubin's hinting at some other stuff that he wants me to say. But I also, during undergraduate, especially during the first 2 years of community college, I worked a part-time to full-time job at a grocery store. And I was doing pretty good at that grocery store. I was sort of moving my way on up. But ultimately, I didn't really have enough time to do all the things that I needed to do to succeed. I think you can sort of do a couple of things and be good at them, but you can't really do many things and be good at all of them. And so while I was working at my grocery store job, I made a pretty good amount of money doing it, and I liked the work that I was doing, but it took up a lot of my time. I was working 40 hours a week a lot of times, and that's 40 hours a week you can't spend studying. And I'm not saying you have to study all 40 of those hours, but if you work 40 hours and then you study for another 20, that doesn't leave you a lot of time left in your week for, socializing, doing that other type of thing. So those are all things that I would love for you guys to think about. I know it's hard sometimes to continue to, or it's hard to like have that financial stress on board with not having that part-time job that you had. But I think it's really difficult to make it if you spend that much time working. And you'll see a lot of people in medical school who have they're from sort of well-off families. And I was not from a well-off family. And that's why I was working a lot during community college. And I think a lot of reason those people succeed is because they don't have to worry about money and their parents sort of pay their way through a lot of stuff. And I'm not saying that you should feel guilty if you have parents who are going to help you pay your way through stuff. You should take advantage of it and not work and just spend all your time, all your free time that you were going to spend studying, doing that instead of working. The other thing is I did a couple of things during community college that helped me get by financially without having to, without working a separate job. So one of them was that I took out loans during community college. A lot of people don't take out loans during community college. And, if you live with your parents, you can probably get by pretty cheap if your parents are willing to sort of support you while you're at community college. I did live with my parents during community college, and that helped quite a bit. And then I took out some small loans to pay for the extra stuff that I did. I also, once I got further along, spent quite a bit of my time tutoring. So I was very good at chemistry, particularly general chemistry, not as good at organic chemistry as general chemistry. And I formed some pretty good relationships with a couple of the people I mentioned before, Brian Weisbart, and one of the other general chemistry professors at community college, Linda Zarzana. And I actually helped them with grading tests. I helped them with tutoring courses, and I got paid pretty well for those tutoring courses. I got paid like $10 an hour or something, which, doesn't sound like anything now, but was pretty decent money back in like 2010. And, part of why I did so well on the MCAT in those sections was because I was essentially tutoring a course. So I would review that course all the time. And it would also help me sort of support myself. So by the time I went to go take the MCAT, I'd been tutoring 2 general chemistry courses for, 2 years. I did not have to spend very much time reviewing general chemistry for the MCAT. So if you have opportunities to do that during community college, I encourage you to do it, because you can take a lot of stress off your financial life by doing it. It'll help you study for the other future. And then learning to teach is a good skill. So I am, like I said earlier, I'm going to go into academic medicine when I'm done with all of my work here. And my intention is to teach people both in the operating room and in like a more formal, like medical school type course. And having done all that tutoring in the past has really helped me a lot now that I'm getting ready to incorporate that into more of my professional life. So if those opportunities come up for you guys, if you do really well in a course, approach your professor and see if they need help tutoring, or if your community college, like my community college, had a formal program. It was called the Beacon program, where you can teach groups. I encourage you guys to seek that stuff out. I think that's probably it for that one. I lost my sort of train of thought as to where we started with that, but I think I probably got to the answer of it.
Did you have to do any volunteering related to medicine to be competitive for medical school?
I'm sorry, can you repeat one more time?
Did you have to do any volunteering that was related to medicine or like in the medical field in order to be competitive for medical school?
I think you probably have to do some volunteering related to medicine in order to be competitive for medical school. And the reason I say that, and I don't think that has to be the bulk of your, volunteering time. It certainly wasn't the bulk of mine. But I think when you're applying to medical schools want to know that you have a general idea of what you're getting into. I will say, volunteering in the hospital didn't show me everything or prepare me for everything that medical school and residency was. But I think I got a good enough sense to know that it was something that I wanted to do. And I had done enough of it that when I went to my medical school interviews, no one was going to look at me and say, oh, this guy doesn't really know what he's getting into. So I would say if you're going to apply for medical school, you should definitely do some sort of healthcare related volunteering. Because one, it will make you look better when you apply for medical school. But two, medical school is long and it is expensive, and it is hard. So if you are going to get into something like that, you should know what you're doing. And doing a little bit of volunteering like that will give you a better opportunity to see if it is what you really want it to be. I am very happy that I chose medicine. I don't think I would go back and choose something else. I'm also happy that I chose anesthesiology, but there are aspects of the field that had I not known about going in would have been very shocking, like the amount of work and that type of thing that you have to do. It's important to know those things before you get into it.
Next question. Did you ever consider becoming a PA? Can you please explain the difference between an MD and a PA, and then how best to make that decision?
Yeah, that is a great question. I never did consider being a PA. That's mostly because I didn't know what a PA was before I went to medical school. I had sort of a general inkling that there were these people who were not nurses, but were not doctors also. We now refer to them all sort of glibly as mid-levels. Basically, they are people who practice not quite at the level of a physician, but they practice more independently than someone who is like a general nurse, in that they can put in orders, tell people sort of the trajectory of their care, diagnose and treat things, but they're not ultimately responsible for the medical decisions because a physician still oversees them in most places. So going to PA school most of the time is a 2-year program after undergraduate. If anybody else knows differently, they can feel free to interrupt me, but those are the ones that I know. And of the PAs that I have met, they are fairly happy with their jobs. So I have a couple of friends who are PAs at the Veterans Affair, the VA in West Los Angeles. They are pretty happy with their job. And there are a lot of people who are sort of an in-between nurse and in-between anesthesiologist position that I know, which is a unique position called CRNA. So a CRNA is a certified registered nurse anesthetist. There are more mid-levels in anesthesiology than there are in other fields. So there's 2 groups of them: CRNAs, which are nurses who did a year of critical care and then did 2 years of anesthesiology training, or anesthesia training, I should say. And then there are what are called anesthesiology assistants or anesthesia assistants who do a 2 years master's program. So those are all sort of equivalent to a PA in the field of specifically of anesthesiology. And those people like their jobs. So if you are thinking about becoming a PA, or if you're thinking about becoming a nurse and maybe considering a CRNA, look into those things. Look into anesthesia assistants. It's also a very good job. I think they make like $170,000 or something from a master's degree for 2 years. That's pretty good. Think about it. And then the other one, there's all these little niche groups in medicine that no one knows about until you've already gone through medical school. The other one that you guys should look into is a perfusionist. So a perfusionist is someone who runs heart-lung bypass machines, either in the operating room or in the ICU. Those folks, I don't know how long they have to go to school, but it is fairly long. I think it's longer than just a general PA position would be, but they make quite a bit of money. They're very happy with their jobs. And it's something that you just don't get exposed to unless you're already into medicine. So anesthesia assistants, CRNAs, PAs, perfusionists, those are all very cool jobs that are not the traditional medical job. That being said, even knowing about all those things now, I would still probably go to medical school, and I would still probably become an anesthesiologist instead of a CRNA or an anesthesia assistant. And the reason for that is I am a pretty strong-willed guy. And when you're in one of those positions as a PA or as a CRNA or a perfusionist, ultimately the broad medical decisions are made by a physician. And it's important to me to be that person who makes those decisions. But as you sort of go through life, your values may change, and not everyone is going to care about that. And if you want to have a job that's a little bit more relaxed on hours, but still makes a pretty good amount of money, those other careers are very good options.
Perfusionist, you have to have a college degree.
Mm.
And there's some programs that give you master's. It's a 2-year program, but and some programs it's just a certificate, but it's still 2 years because it's the hours that you have to do. I think you have to do, I think it's like something like 500 or 700 hours. I'm not exactly sure, but you need to have a college degree and you need to go to a program. There's not a lot of programs for perfusionists, but you could find them, and they make really good money. They make between 130 to 170,000 a year. They're on call. They do a lot of other things. So it's a good job. It's just you're just gonna have to decide if you. I mean, you basically sit in front of a machine and make sure that it works and there's no kinks and the solutions are mixed and everything else. But you're not licensed. You need to be licensed. You need to be certified, but you can't. You don't talk to patients, and you can't prescribe medications or anything like that. So basically, just go to the operating room. They You set up the machine, you hand it to the surgeon, they put it in. The anesthesiologist may yell at you to make some other stuff. You may yell back at the anesthesiologist or the surgeon, and but that's pretty much it. But there's a lot of other jobs that you can do. But again, what Dr. Little said, that if you are a strong-willed person, or you want to talk to patients, or you want to do those types of things, then yeah, it's
like Juven was saying, if you want to be the person that makes those decisions and has that ultimate say, then I think the only way to go really is to go to medical school and become a physician. And there's also sort of a confidence that you have with being a physician that I don't think that you get quite as much in other fields. We work a lot of hours and we do a lot of studying, but if something really bad happens in an operating room, I can pretty much handle it. People are going to turn to you and ask you what to do. It's a little unique being an anesthesiologist because our realm is pretty narrow compared to most other subspecialties. But one thing I really pride myself on is if something goes badly in an operating room, even the surgeon is basically going to ask me, hey, things are not looking good. I really need you to help me get out of this. And that is something that I really enjoy having those skills, and I really enjoy being useful in that way. And I think we've spent probably a lot of time talking about perfusionists, which is an extremely niche group. But perfusionists, like Juven said, they make a lot of money and they have pretty decent hours. They have to take call probably more than PAs do, but they basically have to listen to a surgeon tell them what to do for the entire case. And so I don't think I could ever do a job where I had to have direct oversight like that from another person. But that's not to say that job is unreasonable. A lot of people would be thrilled to have that job, but it probably wouldn't be for me.
So did you break up your science classes, or did you take multiple semester quarters? And then the second part of the question is, what approach do you recommend for taking courses such as chemistry, physics, and calculus?
Yep. I would not break up your science courses because the material all sort of builds. So I think there's something to be said for thinking about unit values to courses and sort of what kind of load you can take. So when you take chemistry courses, I think at American River College, a chemistry course was 4 units for a general chemistry course. And then your regular run-of-the-mill, 3-hour a day, like psychology class, for example, was a 3-unit course. So they're sort of saying the general chemistry course is a little bit harder, and that's why you put 4 units on instead of 3. But that 1-unit difference does not adequately explain the difference in studying requirements and the difference in time spent outside your chemistry course doing coursework. The reason I say that is because you may have taken 15 units during community college or something like that in courses that are psychology-esque level difficulty courses. But if you took that same 15 units worth of pre-med courses, general chemistry, physics, calculus, that 15 units is going to be much more difficult than the 15 units that you took before. And if you know that you're going to be at community college for 3 years, I'm not encouraging people to intentionally slow their community college trajectory, but I think you should think about this because it's important how well you do in community college, especially when you're applying to medical school. You want to have the best GPA that you can apply with when you're going in. If you know you're going to be at community college for 3 years, maybe don't take your first semester taking a general chemistry course, a physics course, and a calculus course. Especially if you, like me, came out of high school, not having really developed any study skills and not really learning how to work hard yet. That's going to be a big burden for your first semester, right? And so the chances that you're going to succeed at that are are pretty low compared to what you personally are capable of, right? I would take one of those courses your first semester so you can get a good feel for how much work you're going to have to put into this. Get really good at that one course, learn the study skills you need for that one course first, and then take more courses later on. Next semester, maybe you'll take your Gen Chem 2 course, or your 402 course is what it was for me. And then take your first physics course along with it, or your first calculus course along with it, and sort of ratchet your difficulty up over time. So you're not just like going from 0 to 60, right? Because if you're not used to that and you haven't built those skills, you're not going to do well in those courses. And you're going to have to put those courses on your application when you apply to medical school. And I'm not saying it'll hinder you 100% from getting into medical school, but it's not going to help you. And you'll have to have some good explanation as to why you did really poorly on those courses. And you have a good explanation. You can say, I didn't know what I was getting into, and I hadn't developed the skills that I needed to do well. But it's a lot easier to not have to have that conversation and to do well in those courses anyway. And if you do well in those first courses that you're taking one at a time, you'll sort of develop a little bit of confidence. And the more you succeed at your coursework, the more confident you'll get. And building that confidence, it makes you feel a lot better about yourself, and it makes it a lot easier to keep on going on, because you have a long road ahead of you, and you don't want to feel like you're trudging all the time, right? So don't start off going 100 miles an hour, I think is the general gist of what I was saying. I think there was like a second half of the question that I don't think I answered. What was it?
It was more so like, how would you go about taking these courses? Like, do you have any tips for students taking these courses now and like studying for it and everything?
Yeah, definitely. So the books I talked about are great for general studying tips. I think my general studying tips I've covered probably more than I need to, spaced recall or spaced repetition active recall, get an Anki program, learn how to use it, learn how to make those cards, read a couple of those books so you can learn those study skills. But the skills that I will tell you that generally worked well for me are that I studied either alone in a quiet place. My favorite place is the library at American River College. If I could still study there, I still would, because I think it's the best place to study in the entire world. It was quiet, and people generally were doing the work that they wanted to do there. If you're going to study with people, try to study with people who are motivated to get their work done and who are smarter than you. I had a couple of friends who I studied with during undergraduate. They were both smarter than me, and that really helped me out a lot, because I sort of would look at them and go like, okay, well, this is sort of how I'm going to have to do in order to be successful. And so you sort of emulate that over time. So study in a quiet place, study with some friends who are smart and motivated, and then study a little bit every day, especially if you're just starting out at this. I don't recommend taking your textbook to the library and trying to read the entire thing cover to cover. You're not going to retain that much information. It's going to feel like drinking from a fire hose, and you probably won't be ready for it. So take it a little bit slow, start learning those skills early on, and then build up that step over time. At community college, I think one of the things at community college that is the biggest advantage that we don't talk about is your access to your professors. When I went to Davis, most courses that I took had somewhere around 400 students. So if you went to office hours at Davis, it was pretty hard to really like have a conversation with professors and ask them for feedback, ask them what they think you could be doing better. That type of feedback is essentially impossible in a course size like that. In community college, most of your courses are somewhere between 30 and 70 people, right? So you have a rich opportunity to spend time with your professors, get to know them. So one, they can write good letters of recommendation for you. And two, they can tell you what you're good at and what you're not. During my first general chemistry course, I met one of my good mentors, Brian Weisbart, and I went to office hours to talk to him and see how things were going. And he was like, okay, well, if you want to go to medical school, like the level of work that you're putting into this is frankly just not enough. And that was like not the funnest thing to hear, but super important for me, right? Because if I continued working at that pace that I was working at before, I just wasn't going to make it. And having that close relationship and getting that close access to my professors at community college really, really helped me out quite a bit. So go see your professors in office hours, seek active feedback from you. They will know better than anyone else what you need to do well in your individual courses. Ask them what students who've done well in their courses in the past have done, because I can tell you all the study skills in the world, and they're applicable to the vast majority of things. But certain teachers have certain expectations, and they will have had students that they really liked in the past, and they will be happy to tell you what those students did that helped them succeed in those courses.
Can I just follow up on this? So you're taking chemistry, physics, and calculus. Chemistry and physics, that's 12 hours of lab. That's basically 12 hours that you have to prepare for those labs, probably write some sort of, so that's about 20 hours that's right at the door. There's 168 hours a week in a week. You do have to do certain things that are unavoidable, like sleeping, eating, going to the bathroom, taking showers. So that's a really tough. And on top of it, if you have a job that you need to do to survive, if you have family obligations, relationships, all of these things that you can't, you may be the only person that is providing childcare for your younger siblings. Those are all things you have to take into consideration. Um, if you say takes you 3 years to finish community college with a 3.0 versus 4 years with a 4.0, do the 4 years. Actually, technically, you can't even get into a UC with a 3.0 now in most of the science degrees. So you need to have good grades. So nobody's going to give you a cookie for finishing chemistry, physics, calculus in one semester, in that semester, and you get all B's or you get a C out of it. And to recover those grades are very, very hard. So, don't hurt yourself. Set yourself up for success. This is in medical. I mean, and you could ask every dean of admission that comes on that says, they don't really look at what courses. They look at what courses you took, but not how many you took. And if you spread them out, they're not going to ask. But if you've taken chemistry, physics, calculus, or biology, OChem and calculus or something else, and you don't have good grades, they're going to ask you for that. But if you've taken, I mean, they say you should not take more than one lab class a semester, maybe two. But also, I think Cal Newport was for every 1 hour of class, you spend 2 to 2.5 hours studying outside of it.
Yep.
So start counting. If you're taking, I think a 5-unit class is not, well, it's a 5-unit chemistry class is 9 hours a week. So 9 by 2 is 18. So just start counting the hours, and if you're commuting and all those different things, and so don't set yourself up for failure. Yeah. So taking multiple semester quarter classes. I mean, I think we had a few weeks ago, somebody was an undergrad at UCLA and was taking OChem, physics, genetics, and they're like, well, how do I do extracurricular activities? You can't. You just can't.
I'll also say, when I applied for medical school, no one asked me how many years I was in community college. No one asked me, why are you in community college for 4 years? Nobody cared. I did have a course during my second semester of community college where I withdrew from like 3 courses, and I got like a C in 2 other courses. They asked me about that, and I had to explain that I didn't know what I was doing. But nobody cared that I went to community college for 4 years. And if that's how long it takes, that's how long it takes. But like Geffen was saying, you can't get into medical school without doing well academically, and you have to figure out how you're going to do that. And taking 3 lab courses is really, really challenging. I think I only took one course, one semester at the end of community college where I had 3 lab courses. And I pretty much had hammered out how I was doing things at that time. And I'd done most of the extracurricular activities I was going to do at that point, and it wasn't working. So I pretty much spent all my time doing that. And that's what it took me to succeed in 3 lab courses at the same time. When I took my general chemistry course, the first one where my professor told me that I didn't work hard enough, and if I wanted to succeed in going to med school, I needed to work harder, I was only taking 1 at the time. So they're hard courses, and you need to take your time learning how to do them, and you need to make sure that you're not going to overwhelm yourself, because if you do get poor grades, people will ask you about it. And if you don't get good enough grades to go to a 4-year university, then it doesn't matter if you want to go to medical school. None of that stuff matters, because then you're wasting your time. You can't do even any of those alternative careers, right? So I know that I sometimes can sound a little bit, I think, overly gentle because I don't want to like scare people or hurt people's feelings, but you have to do well. So figure out what it's going to take for you to do well.
This next question relates back to how you were talking about community college and how long it took you. So they're asking, did you ever feel stressed for taking so long to get into medical school?
Yep, sure did. Yeah, I felt super stressed for taking 4 years to do community college. I felt very stressed that I took a year off after medical school. Before I took a year off in between undergraduate and medical school. But ultimately, I'm 32 now, and I am not the oldest person in my residency class. Not even close. We have someone in my residency class who's going to be graduating who will be 40 when they graduate. And he doesn't care. He's very happy that he's going to be an anesthesiologist at 40 years old. Medicine's not about money. I'll tell you that now. But he's going to graduate at 40 years old and still be making $40,000 a year or $400,000 a year as an anesthesiologist in community practice. He's gonna make up that time. He will make enough money to make it up. He'll be fine. So if it takes a long time, it takes a long time. I do want to comment on taking a year off after medical school. A lot of people take years
undergrad.
Oh yeah, sorry. You're right. I do want to comment on taking a year off after undergrad before medical school. I did not. I did research in between taking a year off between undergrad and medical school, but I did not do it for the intention of doing research. I did it for 2 reasons. One was in order to take the MCAT early enough to apply for medical school, right when I would graduate undergraduate, I would have to be studying for the MCAT before I finished all the coursework that was involved. And I would have to be studying for the MCAT while I was taking other courses. And if you want to do well on the MCAT, I really think you should set aside time to do well on the MCAT. I would not study for the MCAT while you're studying for your other courses. I would take dedicated time to do it. And I would make sure that if you are going to take the MCAT, that you've taken all of the coursework that's going to be covered on the MCAT first. And because of the way schedules worked out, I took my MCAT in between junior year and senior year of undergraduate, and I did really well on the MCAT. And the reason I did that was because I set myself up for success. That meant I was going to take a year off after undergrad before medical school. I don't regret doing it because I got into medical school. So, sometimes that's what it takes.
Someone is a little confused as to what you mean by undergraduate school. They're asking, does undergraduate school mean getting your bachelor's degree?
Yeah, undergraduate means getting your bachelor's degree. So undergraduate, I typically, when I say undergraduate, I'm referring to the 2 years I spent at UC Davis. But technically, yes, undergraduate includes all of the time that you spend between when you graduate high school and when you get your bachelor's degree. Once you get a bachelor's degree, any school after that is considered graduate school. Medical school is a type of, professional school, but it's a type of graduate school. And any time before that is considered undergrad. So I apologize. I do typically use those phrases interchangeably. But yes, undergraduate is up until you get a bachelor's degree.
Two more questions. So the second to last is, how did you adjust your study in terms of tools? Do you prefer paper and pencil, or did medical school force you to adopt to digital tools?
Yeah, I like paper and pencil, but I use primarily digital tools. I would say I would learn to be flexible if I could. So some coursework is going to lend itself really, really well to paper and pencil studying. And then some coursework is not going to lend itself well to paper pencil studying. So for example, there are some courses I took in undergraduate at UC Davis. They were endocrinology courses where you spent a lot of time drawing graphs and drawing figures. And that's really hard to do on a computer. So I spent all that studying time with a pen and paper. I got that like 10 pack of multicolored Stedler pens. Super recommend the tri-tip fine liners. They're amazing. Check those out. So that's what I used for that. But now I predominantly study using Anki, the flashcard tool, and I use online textbooks. So the two books I'm using right now are two anesthesiology textbooks. The online versions of them are awesome. And the reason for that is the online versions of those textbooks allow you to highlight, copy, paste, all that type of stuff, which is useful when you're making flashcards. And they also include little vignettes where they'll have tiny little presentations that are in a little bit more detail on a topic. And they often will include like practice questions that are interactive in the text. And I think that sort of breaks up the monotony of just trying to like read passage after passage after passage of like this dense text, because you're really not going to retain a ton of information doing it that way. So I think realistically, most of the digital tools we have available now are better than traditional pen and paper things, especially for the volume of information that you have to learn. So if I could give you any advice, I would say learn to use those digital tools because they are there because they make people's lives easier. And they've been successful at doing that. And they've certainly been successful for me. But be flexible because there are going to be courses where pen and paper work is important, especially chemistry courses, organic chemistry in particular, physics courses. Working those problems out with pen and paper are going to be, it would be really hard to do it on a computer.
All right. And then our last question is, how did taking a gap year after undergrad help you in your life and applying to medical school?
Oh, good question. And I actually wish I'd covered this earlier. I meant to, but thank you for reminding me. The other really big advantage of taking a gap year, one, it made me much more successful in the MCAT because I had time to study for it. But also I was able to interview for medical school while I was basically working a regular job instead of having to study for classes. So I did not have to worry really that much about whether my interview was going to fit into my schedule, how many interviews I could do, whether I could afford to pay for interviews. Because if I took interviews during undergrad, like while I was still studying at UC Davis undergrad for medical school, I would have had to find some way to pay for those flights and pay for those drives and pay for those hotel stays, which is hard. But when I took a gap year, I had a pretty decent paying job. So I could schedule all those interviews whenever I wanted. And I didn't have to worry about how I was going to pay for them.
Tell them what job you did.
I was a junior specialist, which is a sort of staff researcher. So I worked on, I was basically a diabetes researcher at UC Davis undergraduate, working in the same department, neurobiology, physiology, and behavior that I did my major in. I loved that job. And I also got some publications out of it. So it was a great job. I got paid a pretty good amount of money. I only had to work like 40 hours a week. And I actually wound up with some pretty good mentors who helped me out during medical school as well. And I learned some really good research skills that I used while I was in medical school doing research too.
So I lied earlier. We have another question.
That's okay.
How did you find volunteer opportunities?
Yeah, so there's lots of ways to find volunteer opportunities. I have some favorites. I don't know where everybody's at. I assume PreMedCC.org is grabbing people from kind of all over the place. But there are some organizations that are kind of all over the place. So just go online and look and you'll find some. Some of my favorites are the International Rescue Fund. I think it's still called the IRF. Maybe it's not. It may be the International Rescue Committee, but basically that's a group.
IRC.
Is it IRC? Thank you. IRC is a group that basically helps people from different countries immigrate to the United States and sort of get more assimilated with their lives here in the United States. So I did a lot of work with the IRC when I was in undergraduate and when I was in medical school. So check them out. They're really good. You'll feel very good about doing the work. Plus you'll get exposure to a little bit of other cultures. And it's something where, you know, when I was an undergraduate and when I was at community college, I did not feel like I had a lot of skills. Like I did not feel like I was a very valuable person. But working for IRC, those people didn't have any of the skills that I have, having grown up speaking English as my native language, and basically learning how to navigate society in the United States and in California. And so you can really help people out a lot, and you really have a lot that you can contribute. And then same sort of things, anywhere you go, you can look up activities for homeless people, for working with homeless folks. Here in LA, there's a lot. Up in Sacramento, there's a lot. Whatever you are interested in doing, I guarantee you, someone has some opportunity where you can help them, whether it's in person or online. Somebody has thought of that, and somebody has built an organization that you can take part in.
The other thing is, I would tell you, if you speak a foreign language, if you have skills that, if you have skills that are needed, computer skills, social media. How many of you have social media? So many organizations that need people to do social media work. Look at the skills that you have that you bring to the table, because it's a trade-off. Somebody wants you to come and volunteer with their organization. What can you give them? It's not just take, but you have to give them something besides your time. But yeah, I mean, talk about like some of the homeless thing that you did. You were a shelter. Can you talk about that a little bit, what you did?
Yeah, I worked for a group in Davis, which I'm very proud of. I think they do some of the best work in the country, called Davis Community Meals. And while I was there, I started off as a volunteer. And this is kind of a good segue into how things can pan out into jobs and help you support yourself later on too. I started off as a volunteer at a homeless shelter. Basically what I did was I would stay at the homeless shelter during the nights, and I would do intakes. So basically I would help people come into the shelter, get settled in, make sure they were meeting all the rules of the shelter. And then I would basically stay there overnight with the shelter and stay there overnight with the folks in the shelter and make sure that everything was going smoothly and that everybody was sort of acting how they were supposed to act and that type of stuff. And when you are doing some work like that, it feels pretty good, because every night that I worked, and every night that I stayed the night at that shelter with those folks, 18 to 20 people had a nice place to stay that night. And so it's super gratifying work. But I also stayed with that group for a really long time, and they actually offered me a paying job at that group after a while. So it's pretty cool, because I was getting paid like only $8 an hour, which, isn't very much, but I would have done it for free anyway. And then I would get paid like $8 an hour to go over there and like sleep for 8 hours. So I felt actually a little bit guilty about that. But, I had been with that group for such a long period of time that I was able to provide something of value to them. And that felt very good. And also when I applied to medical school, I had a letter of rec from Davis Community Meals, and they were able to say, yeah, Chris worked for us for 3 years, and we all got to know him really well, and he really cares about what he does. And it means a lot when you've worked at a volunteer group for such a long period of time. It means a lot when they write a letter for you and they say, I've known him for 3 years. He's reliable and he's genuine in what he likes doing. As opposed to volunteering at like 20 other different things for like one-time 4-hour events. Not that those things are not valuable, but I think it shows some commitment to volunteering. It shows that you have some commitment if you can volunteer at a program for a long time. And if you are going to volunteer at a program for a long time, it's a lot more helpful if you like what you're doing. And so that's why I talk about groups like Davis Community Meals and the International Rescue Committee, because I love those groups and I love spending my time with those groups. So it's a lot easier for me to volunteer with those groups for a long period of time.
So can I just put the link for Davis Community Meals. So now all of you are going to run up there to try to volunteer there.
You should.
You can't, you don't need to do that because there's this really cool thing called the internet. And you can go and find out shelter listings in all over the United States and go to them in your own community. So one thing is we had a speaker a few months ago mention something and everybody ran to do this thing. So I mean, wherever you are, you could go and look at the shelter listing in your own community and reach out to them. And the internet's a wonderful thing. So.
You have any more questions for us? Or did we get through all of them?
We went through all the questions. Unless anyone has any last-minute questions they want to ask, please ask them now.
If not, I will do a super quick summary. So going to medical school is tough. It's worth it. I wouldn't choose anything else. I am very happy with my job. Even if I have to work a lot of hours or I have a really tough case, I wouldn't pick doing anything else. To get there, you have to put in a lot of work and you have to go through a long time. And then in order to get through all that stuff, you need to learn some skills. So get some mentors who can help teach you those skills. And then I would spend some time, read a couple of those books. Make It Stick is great. It's a little bit more theoretical. If you're looking for just really good practical books, then I would hit Cal Newport's books, because I think Cal Newport does a really good job just giving you sort of the basics of how to physically do stuff. Deep work is a little bit better for long-term projects like research, that type of thing. How to Be a Straight A Student, I think, is probably the most effective one for this type of group.
Okay, so it looks like no one else is asking any questions, but thank you for taking your time and explaining all of this to us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you guys very much for taking the time to listen to me. I really appreciate it. I wish you guys the best of luck. I think if you stick to all your stuff, you guys can all make it. Oh, also,